Human resources are the core of any organization. And it's not even just a department or a function. It's like the collective potential and creativity and capability of people working together. Someone has to be the one who's constantly reminding the organization, how can we maximize human potential here? And there's too much to lose if we don't. And so it does come back to, it's creating environments where people can grow, can find meaning in their work, as we discussed, and can innovate. It is entirely wrong to think that technology is neutral. Technology is never neutral. It is built from human biases. It is also built from our values, so it has good and bad encoded in it, but there are definitely biased values and a set of prejudices that we carry. So we have to be very careful about what we delegate.
Managing a global team is complex, but Deal makes it simpler with payroll, HR, IT, and compliance all in one place. That's why over 35,000 businesses trust Deal to hire, pay, and manage teams worldwide. See how Deal works at DEEL.com/NICKDAY. That's deal.com/Nick Day. Deal, your forever people platform. Hello and welcome back to the HR L&D Podcast, the show where we explore the people strategies that are shaping this very exciting future of work, performance, and of course, leadership. I'm your host. My name is Nick Day. I'm the CEO at JGA Recruitment Group. We are specialist global human resources recruiters with offices in the UK and the USA. But most importantly, I'm the host of this wonderful show. And today I'm thrilled to welcome you all to one of the world's most leading voices at the intersection of humanity and technology. That is Kate O'Neill. Kate is an internationally recognized tech humanist, digital innovator, CEO of KO Insights, and the author of the fantastic book, What Matters Next, a leader's guide to making human-friendly tech decisions in a world that's moving just too fast. We're going to get into all of that in just a moment. But I should also add, she has advised global brands from Google and Microsoft and Unilever. She's also worked with the United Nations. She's appeared in the New York Times, Wired, BBC, and more. And I have to say, I've been to her website. It's well worth a visit. She is a fantastic keynote speaker as well. And you can really get a feel for her work on her website, well, I will put a link through to in the show notes. But in this episode, we are going to be focusing in on leadership in the age of AI. Everyone's talking about AI and how we can make better decisions faster. How can we create human-friendly workplaces in this new, exciting, but sometimes scary and disruptive tech-driven world? Well, HR and L&D leaders, you're in the right place. We're going to be talking about how we can shape that future without losing your soul. I should say there, Kate's words, not mine. So without further ado, Kate, welcome to the HR L&D Podcast. How are you feeling?
Thanks, Nick. I'm feeling great. Thank you so much for having me here. What a great intro, too. I love that. First of all, when you said the name of my book, and it's like, What Matters Next, A Leader's Guide to Human-Friendly Tech Decisions in a World That's Moving Too Fast, is the title, but you were like, just too fast. And I'm like, oh, we missed the just in the title. That's perfect. So you embellished it in just the right way.
There you go. I'm calling that artistic license on the host's prerogative. Well, I know you bring the energy. I've seen some of your keynote talks. They are absolutely fantastic. There's a wonderful YouTube channel, which I really want our listeners to take a look at as well. I will direct everyone. It's in our show notes if you want to go there straight away. But, you bring the energy as well. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today. But before we dive into all of that, I'm going to ask my first question that all of my guests get from me, which is this. What do the words human resources mean to you?
So to me, human resources are the core of any organization. And it's not even just a department or a function. It's like the collective potential and creativity and capability of people working together.
Lovely.
And I'll just embellish on that one bit, which is to say that in the context of technological transformation, HR takes on an even more crucial role as the steward of human value and meaningful experiences at work.
Perfect. Perfect. No, that embellishment was definitely worthwhile and worth waiting for. So now I want to dive into the book in particular. You talk about something called the Now Next Continuum, which I really want to bring to our audience's attention. Before we do that, tell us a little bit about your background, because you've got an interesting intersection in terms of your own experience of how this has all come to the fore as well. And I'd love just to give our listeners a bit of a foundation, a platform to understand your learnings and your experiences.
Yeah, thanks. I come to this kind of organically through just years and years working in tech. And so, 30 some years ago, starting out working in tech in Silicon Valley. Um, just over the years of taking on a variety of different tech roles, I found that I was always the person who advocated for the user or the customer or the patient or the guest or, whatever role a human plays in the context of that organization. And just over time realizing, oh, that means that I am really about the human experience, no matter what form that takes within technology. And there's a lot of reasons that I think that goes back to. And one of them is, as I talk about in the book, in What Matters Next. Out of the 6 books I've written, this is the first time I've really delved a little bit into my language background. So I was a linguist by education, and I've always been fascinated with language as a sort of tool or technology for communication. And it's really interesting now, here in 2025, 3 years after, or almost 3 years after the launch of ChatGPT to the public, when we all became kind of confronted with large language models. And I think it really excited and provoked us into thinking about what language means to us, not only as humans, but as a vehicle for expression of ideas and for, distillation of ideas and innovation and that sort of thing. So it's been really interesting now, 30 years later, to be sort of seeing the fruits of being a linguist in the technology space and having had this human-centric lens the whole time. A lot is really coming into play that I've been anticipating and thinking about and really pondering, but it's been at this very philosophical, abstract level, and now it's deeply practical.
I love that. I've got to be very careful now with my words and make sure I use them correctly. But in the world of
Not at
AI,
all.
of course, that brings out huge amounts of different, people's understanding. The word AI, some people assume AI is ChatGPT, and of course, it's
Right.
a large language learning model that is part of a much bigger evolution of technology.
Right.
AI is front and center in the world of HR. People are trying to sell a lot of AI-driven solutions. People want to automate more processes and utilize AI's capabilities in different ways. And with that's come a
Right.
whole new sort of lexicon of different things that are people are almost bamboozled by it. And in your book, you talk about the now next continuum. So can you explain how that can help HR and L&D leaders? Because I think when they get to grips with that, it might help them to adapt to some of those changes, perhaps a little bit quicker, with a little bit more clarity.
Yeah, yeah. And I think to set the context, the Now Next Continuum is something that I came up with in response to what I kept hearing from leaders across different parts of organizations. So, in the keynote speaking that I do, in the consulting that I do, I'm very often talking to the C-suite or talking to, VP levels across different organizations. And just consistently, no matter who the person is in what role, they were expressing a lot of hesitancy about decision making, the sense that decision making has gotten incredibly more complex because of things like AI systems, because of automation, because of the impacts on jobs and the larger systemic changes too, climate change and geopolitical upheaval and all of the things that we all know and sense, but it's very hard to make decisions in the context of knowing that those things may be affected by the decisions that you make, especially if you're making decisions within a very, very large enterprise. So that was something that I kept hearing, and I felt, a lot of empathy for. It's like I can imagine how difficult it must be to be a decision maker in an organization at that scale, and feel like I don't have any way to make sense of what I'm dealing with here. So what I tried to do is, my work, I feel like is at the intersection of 4 topics. It's tech, humanity, business, and the future. And the future part is the one that I think most people struggle with in some ways because it feels so uncertain for people. And so what the Now Next Continuum is a model that I developed that helps make the future feel a little bit less uncertain by kind of helping us understand that it's a continuum, that we're really looking at the through line of decisions we've already made in the past and actions we've already taken, as well as externalities we didn't have anything to do with. Let's be fair. We didn't control everything that brought us to this moment, but we understand the past. We can look to the past and feel a lot of confidence about what we know about the past. And we can stand in the present and feel like most of what is around us at this moment is knowable, right? Like it's sort of in the present, we're always looking to the past for knowledge. But what we're looking to the future for is foresight, is looking for, how could we carry what we know from the past and what's knowable about the present into what we can predict about the future, what we can at least anticipate or foresee somewhat, and begin to make decisions that carry through that knowledge and those insights into foresights, and start to break apart that sense that it's all just a big cloud and a wall that's unseeable or unknowable into something that's more like trend lines, more like trajectories of the current trends that are actually not that mysterious. Certainly new externalities will arrive and they will cloud things. Things that we could never have anticipated. The uncertainties that happen as a result of geopolitics still, or of climate changes and things like that. But we still have a lot of visibility that we don't often account for. And so this is an opportunity to, especially when it comes to things like AI systems, to try to anticipate how it is that what kinds of conditions we're going to create by making certain decisions, what kinds of impacts we're going to have, what kinds of consequences, so that we're not in the dark making those decisions, so that we feel like we can make them with more of a sense of empowerment and agency, and that we're doing the right thing by our organizations and by the people who are affected by them.
I love that, because it gives a real practical approach to what is quite a scary time at the moment of not knowing where to start. And you look at the headline news, a lot of it is, forget everything you've ever learned. We're going to start
Right.
again. It's not about skills anymore. It's about attributes. Everything is shifting so fast that the technical skills you had yesterday won't be relevant tomorrow. And the idea of what you got here won't get you there. And these are all the kind of the headline things that we're hearing in the world of HR. And yet HR professionals, particularly at the senior end of the hierarchical structures, if you like, the chief people officers, and they're plate spinning a lot of different things, from sustainability to organizational development to learning and development to diversity and inclusion to talent and resourcing. There's so many things going on there that it can be really difficult for them to lift their head up and have kind of that practical methodology to be able to move forward. And what I loved about the response you just gave is it was really embedded in curiosity. You asked a lot of questions. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the most underused skills that are going to be required going forward, is we need to ask more questions about what we're doing. And you asked 4 or 5, you kind of rattled them off at the end there. And I think they're the kind of questions we need to be asking. But what about some of the blind spots? Because you must see a lot of the senior leaders have blind spots, and where those blind spots exist, must be quite difficult for them to be able to approach rational decision making. What are some of the commonalities you're seeing on that side of things?
Oh, there's a lot. I think I just want to emphasize what you just said too about the questions. It is, as you say, a really underused skill. And I think it's a really important piece of this overall model that I talk about in What Matters Next, because you don't get clear outputs without clear inputs, right? You have to have the right sort of structure to your questioning in order to get clarity at the end of that questioning. I always say, I think that meaningful questions are more valuable than sensible answers, because a sensible answer will only get you the now, right? Like you can deal with what the answer you arrive at is an approach that you can take today. But the question is usually full of great provocation that can continue to provide meaningful insights and foresights as you use it again and again. So as you revisit these meaningful questions quarter after quarter, or whatever your frequency is, it can actually provoke you into great thinking. And I'll say, just to transition back into the question that you asked, that is one of the blind spots that I see leaders have, is that they are always looking for answers and they're not quite clear that the questions that they need to ask need to be open. They need to be well-formed. They need to be really searching. And I tell a story in What Matters Next that's actually from my own development as a leader, because early in my career, I did a lot of tech writing early in my career. And I found that as a young woman working in Silicon Valley, surrounded by male developers who often didn't have such great communication skills, If I went and asked questions about a particular function that I was trying to document, they would give me a wave of the hand and say, go read the code, go read the comments in the code. Well, first of all, the code was never commented, so that was totally irrelevant. But if I did go back and read the code and try to make sense of, okay, this one's doing that and this one's pulling this information, but the thing I can't quite get is this piece right here, then I would have to go back to the developer and spell it out just like that. Like I looked at it and I understand that this is doing this and you're calling this over here, but I'm just looking for the information about this specific function. How does that specific function work and what is it doing? And then they'd be like, okay, you did your homework, you earned this, and I'm going to give you the answer now. And I felt like I earned and learned this sort of defensive posture in question asking. And that really was almost like a professional liability that I carried with me for years. And as I stepped into higher and higher roles and took on more leadership and actually took on more advisory and consulting with leadership, what I found was so fascinating that the most effective leaders I encountered were asking the broadest questions. They were asking the most open, vulnerable questions. They would just sit in a meeting with their team and go, and why is that? And then just wait for an answer. And it felt so different from this posture that I had learned early in my career. And it felt so willing to be the person who knew the least in the room, but could learn the most in that moment. And I just felt like that's a real insight for me to take away from this. And I tried to impart it as a story so that anyone who hasn't learned that skill in their leadership development can adopt that and really take that on, as especially in this moment where there's so much to learn. It's so important for us to take a curious approach, a learning approach, an open-minded approach, and really involve our team too in the learning and the decision making that we do.
Well, I'm definitely a convert for that. I know in your book you reference it of moving from insight to bankable foresight. And I loved your usage of what I would call in the coaching world, it's kind of the use of the silence methodology, where you ask a question and just sit back and let the silence overwhelm everyone and just really think about it before we jump in with a response. I also like that there's a parallel here, I think, maybe at a base level. When we talk about good questions in gets you, I think you gave a better account of it, but it's better than having a sensible answer. It's having a really good question, a really good curiosity at the start. It's kind of similar to the way we work with AI as well, right? And we work with data. Poor data in is going to get you a poor response out. Then the more intelligent we prompt, the more broad our questions can be, or more direct, depending on which angle we want to take and the kind of data we want to get back. But obviously, the more we think about how we work with AI, whether it's through data analytics or whether it's through prompting through language learning models, it's all still about that curiosity and around the correct questioning and the correct data. And so I think there are some parallels as well in the way we do things and the way these things kind of link together. I don't know if that's come through in the work that you do as well and kind of making similar kind of parallels, but it just occurred to me when you were giving that response.
Yeah, it's a great observation. And I think it is important to recognize, first of all, to your point, the data hygiene has long been so important in technology, but the more AI systems and algorithms and automation sort of creep into every aspect of organizations and creep into every aspect of life, let's put it that way, right? Our entire lives are touched by algorithmic processes and automation, and more by AI. And so I think the important thing to understand there is that those systems don't work without data. They're entirely run on the data that they have collected and the data models that they're built on. And in fact, of course, if you pay attention to the news where artists and authors and a lot of creative people are up in arms about their copyright being sort of subsumed into these training models, that's why, because it's the data that informs these models and is able to make them effective and productive. But we also need to recognize that there are limitations within our organizations about the kind of data that's available and how that data is available. Sometimes the data is only available in very loose, unstructured, chaotic kind of ways. And I'm sure we can all think about our own desktops and computer files to understand what I'm referring to there. And then other types of data is very structured in databases and rows and columns and all that sort of thing. But that's not, they're not equivalent. The importance, the structure of the content does not necessarily dictate the importance of the content. And it's going to take probably some generations of us working with increasingly intelligent systems over top of a mess of data before we're really mining what's the potential of the data in the system. And in the meantime, so much of what fills in the gap is human knowledge and human wisdom and understanding at a cultural level what's important within an organization, the sort of cultural knowledge and institutional knowledge that people have, the skills that they carry from one generation of technology to the next. And I think it's really, really important that leaders understand and respect that and really try to preserve that, because I think a lot of the knee-jerk reaction to new technologies is adopt it and kick people out, right? And let's just let's automate those jobs and make our job force smaller. And what you lose along the way is a lot of the opportunity to actually make sense and make better decisions and make more nuanced experiences and culture and products and everything that you're trying to do within an organization. And you won't feel it until you're making the wrong mistakes. So it's a pretty important thing to take with a grain of salt and some caution, and really be thoughtful and deliberate about how you integrate these tools.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think we've touched upon a sensitive area, I think, for not just HR professionals, but a lot of people that work in supporting back office functions for organizations, which is, of course, the fear of AI and automation dehumanizing work. You talked a little bit about how it could impact artists, which I fully understand. You also mentioned, I think the words you used were nuanced experiences. But I think one thing that's really hard for AI to replicate, certainly right now, is that nuance and contextuality ability we have as humans to understand a problem, contextualize it. I have a separate show called the Payroll Podcast, and I know when it comes to payroll, there can be 6 different potentially correct answers to one problem because of the nuance around legislation, and AI is going to not always know which is the right response, because that's not how it works. It needs that level of contextualization understanding. So there is a lot of fear.
Nick, to your point, it goes back to forming the question well, right? To be able to, if you could use maybe AI to help you answer the question of what law applies here, but you'd have to know how to ask the question in order to get that answered right.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So I think when we lean into that fear, I think for me, that's where we're going to find the potential of what we can really achieve on the other side of it. And I'm a big fan of leaning into the things that scare us. Yeah. But there are things that scare us when it comes to this automation and AI. And there are people that are concerned about how it will dehumanize what they do. And as much as I may say, look, it'll automate the manual and make you more strategic, and it all sounds great, in practical terms, is how do we make that step? So how can we argue for a human-ready future, and how can we make sure that the tech decisions we're making are enhancing and not eroding that human experience?
Yeah, I think the talking point for years has been that automation isn't necessarily only taking jobs, right? Like, it's displacing jobs, it's replacing some jobs, but it's also creating new jobs. And there are new job roles that form around the types of automation that we bring into an organization. I think that's still true. And I think we are seeing a more rapid shift that's sort of outpacing the skills of leaders to reshift the organization. And so we've been talking about reskilling and upskilling for a long time, but we haven't necessarily upskilled leaders to be able to upskill organizations in the right way. So there's a real opportunity, I think, at a leadership learning level, LLL. You can start a new podcast, the LLL podcast, and up level the leadership skills so that you can take a more holistic view of what the organization is trying to accomplish and to accomplish at scale, and how AI systems and automation can help with that, while also using what's best about human contribution and human potential to fulfill it. Because you caught this word nuance that I used, and the reason I use that word, and I really gravitate to that word, is because it is a form of meaning. So I will go back to, in my work, one of the most common themes that I return to is meaning. Meaning is the central tool of human experience. It is the central aspect of the human condition, I will argue. I think, we could have a lively debate about this, with anyone on your listening to your show. If they're interested, I'm happy to hear what other ideas you have about this. But I would say it is at least one of the more central constructs of human condition and human experience. And what's so critical about understanding that is that everything we understand about the world, from how we communicate through language as a form of meaning, to things like patterns and purpose and truth and significance, relevance, all of the ways we understand context, it's all about meaning. And then all the way out to the most macro, big picture, what's it all about? Why are we here? Existential or cosmic meaning? All of that is still part of this cloudy, nebulous construct we understand as meaning. And maybe we don't spend a lot of time trying to parse it apart and understand what kind of meaning we're really talking about. But I will make it simple and say that in my understanding of meaning, what it always distills down to is two words: what matters. And now you see why I use that in the title of my book. What matters is a very important question to ask ourselves about everything. What matters here? What matters now? What mattered in the past? How do we carry forward what mattered in the past into what matters now? And what's going to matter in the future? What matters next, right? That's the theme. But I think when we think about how we can understand the way we process meaning into experiences, how we create meaningful cultures, meaningful brands, meaningful experiences, we're not going to be able to do that through strict automation. Like, computers don't understand meaning the way that we do, right? If we delegate meaning creation to machines, we're going to get uncanny valley kind of experiences. For now, it's possible that machines will get better at this. AI systems will get better at this. But for the time being, this is really the domain of humans, trying to create meaningful experiences and meaningful understanding. So to try to understand, how to create value for our customers or the patients that we interact with, or the learners in our universities or whatever, we have to be thinking from a very human-centric standpoint. And the way we do that is by understanding that purpose, when we think about purpose in an organization, that is a shape that meaning takes in business. So it's all about understanding with clarity what matters in an organization. And nuance is one of these facets of meaning and purpose. How do we think about the ways that we can actually dimensionalize our understanding of meaning and purpose in the decisions we make and in the experiences we create, and so on. So I think it never hurts to take things back to this meaning and purpose centric lens. Like, it's going to provide incredible value, insights, and foresights in any context. Whenever we're struggling with a decision or trying to understand which way to go, taking it to a meaning and purpose oriented lens is going to provide some value.
HR leaders. I'm Nick Day, host of this podcast, but also founder of JGA Recruitment Group. And here's what I hear every week from top HR leaders. They say, Nick, we can't find the talent. It's our biggest challenge. And when we do, we can't retain them. Well, that's where we come in. At JGA, we specialize in HR recruitment and only HR recruitment. From executive search assignments placing CHROs, to contingency hires finding HR pros, to global HR transformational contract placements, and every people role in between. Across every vertical and at every single level, we know where the top people are, what motivates them, and most importantly, how to get them excited about your opportunity, even if they're not actively looking. With engagement rates over 90%, we don't rely on job boards. We rely on relationships. We place fast, we place right, and we do it in a way that reflects your brand, your values, and your goals. So if you're building a strategic HR function, please don't leave it to chance. Visit jjrecruitment.com or reach out to me directly, and let's build the future of work together. I love that. I mean, there's Simon Sinek talks about his, the power of why, which isn't a million miles away. We need to understand why we're doing it. But I think there's a bigger context here in relation to the listeners for this show, which of course are HR professionals or chief people professionals, because one of the biggest challenges HR professionals will state they have at the moment is attracting talent and retaining talent. And so central to retaining talent is making sure that the environment you create is one that they feel inclusive and one where they belong, but also one where they have meaningful work. And if the meaningful work isn't there, forget the rewards. Rewards are obviously important, but actually every statistic I've ever looked at as a recruiter will never have salary as the number one reason people change jobs. It's usually because the work isn't meaningful, or they don't like a lead, or they don't believe in the culture or the direction or the values of their organization or their micro team are demonstrating. So I think everything you've said there is absolutely in line with what we've probably known in the world of recruitment for a long time. But how do we create that in what is a really tech-driven world? And I think something that comes to mind for me is in that meaningful element as well. There's an ethics conversation to come through the world of AI, and I think this is important for the HR professionals to listen to this, because AI will also have bias within it because of where it's pulling its resources from, whether it's data. You can look at things from an HR perspective, such as, trying to think of an example off the top of my head, you might find there's a regional pay gap, for example, that is discriminate in some way, that the AI reads this data, assumes that's the norm, and extenuates that in the next lot of pay reviews, as an example. So what are some of the frameworks we can use to make sure that from a humanistic side, we're also able to manage tech with ethical decision making, to keep things people centric, to keep things inclusive, fair, and still give that level of meaning and responsibility that obviously is so important?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and your example is spot on. I do talk in the book about the Amazon application example, which many of your listeners will be familiar with because it's right in your space. But the idea that the application tracking system that Amazon was using was discriminating based on a number of factors, like it had used the top 10% of performers as measured within Amazon's own systems by whatever metrics they were using, and then tried to mimic what those characteristics were in the applicants. And that turned out to be very biased in favor of white male, kind of candidates. So, it was biased against applicants who did not possess what seemed to be those characteristics. And they caught that. They tried to retrain it, and they were not able to successfully retrain it. They ended up taking it back in-house and using it internally in very limited ways. But it's very important to be able to recognize when, these systems that we think are doing the right thing, that they're, there's a perception, I think, that technology is neutral, that it's not biased. But that's an entirely misunderstood misapprehension. As not very well said. Sorry about that. But it is entirely wrong to think that technology is neutral. And technology is never neutral. It is built from human biases. It is also built from our values, so it has good and bad encoded in it. But there are definitely biased values and a set of the prejudices that we carry. So we have to be very careful about what we delegate. The ethics and the fairness approach that we take with it is to just, first of all, recognize that that is true, that we always have to be sort of skeptical of and critical of the data that we're collecting, the outputs that we're getting, and keep an open mind to the idea that maybe we're not getting the best results. Maybe we should go back and be more circumspect about that. The other thing is to have the widest pool of contributors to any given process. If we want to make sure we have an inclusive process, we need to have diverse people at the table informing that process. So it's not a nice to have. It's very much about making sure that you're not, overlooking where you have biases yourself, and bringing people to the table who can compensate for the biases that you may have if you're the leader or the decision maker in a given situation. Another thing is to recognize that we just had this conversation about purpose. I think it's a really important one. It's also one that I feel sheds a lot of light on why we're doing what we're doing, and the decision making that we embark upon can be informed in, again, nuanced ways by understanding. If we try to articulate what it is we're trying to do as an organization, and I like to tell clients that they need to have it in 3 to 5 words. They need to be able to say in 3 to 5 words, in a way that's distinct from their competitors, in a way that's distinct from someone else in another industry, what it is you're trying to do at scale. And when you're able to do that, you were talking about how, people leave jobs because the work isn't meaningful. But I think what we also can understand is that clear sense of purpose, that we can articulate that well, means that we can actually lead that well. We can actually make it feel in a real way through the delegation and the assignments that we give to our employees, that what it is they're actually being tasked with, what they're being asked to do. I go back to, for example, my early days as one of the first 100 employees at Netflix. We all had our own departmental sort of goals, what we were trying to accomplish, but they all very much laddered up to one sort of company-wide understanding of what we were trying to achieve. And what we were trying to achieve may have been articulated in a little bit different way over time. We may have come to new understandings of it, and it should, honestly, it should, as
Things
you
evolve.
grow as a company. Right. But you are always able to somehow articulate that moment, the zeitgeist of what it is you're trying to accomplish as a company, so that other people within the company, all the employees within the company, have a sense of it and can make their own decisions based on how they contribute to that sense of purpose. When you do that, you are setting the company on fire in a good way. You're setting people in an empowered way to go forth and lead in their own area and bring back opportunities and solve challenges and all of the stuff is going to make you so much more effective. And we see that again and again through the many, many companies that we see using this philosophy and using this approach. Their organizations are X number of times more effective, whatever the multiplier is, but you can always find a multiplier that they're more effective, they're more productive. So it's an important thing to be able to take it all back to, again, this purpose view is a very human-centric view. And
I
that
think
approach to leadership works.
And you've highlighted again the element of curiosity there. The values and can change. They evolve. It's that authenticity paradox or values paradox where tomorrow, my view on the world might shift. Something might happen and my view will change, and that's okay. And it's making sure that we question and we reflect on what we thought we knew of the world yesterday is now different, and I'm going to change my view and my values or my organizational purpose or my meaning in response to that disruption or the thing that I've discovered. I wonder if, in your experience, if you've got any kind of real world examples of a company that has really successfully aligned their business strategy with human values using tech. Because I wonder if our HR leaders can really learn from one of those examples, if you have one that you can share.
I share an example in the book, and I'm not sure I'll be able to remember all the specifics from to be able to retell it, but the research is all there in the book, and it's about Levi Strauss during the pandemic, rethinking a lot of what they were doing with digital transformation and making their jeans available online in different ways because retailers, customers weren't able to go into, stores as readily. And they did a lot of digitally transformative kinds of things that were possible for years prior to that. I had written in 2016, I wrote a book called Pixels in Place that was about the intersection of physical and digital experiences and the case of retail making, these kind of blended experiences was already something that was well understood in 2016. So you had retailers who were using virtual mirrors. You had, the sort of brick and click kinds of opportunities where people could order something online, pick it up in store, or order something in store, get it sent to them online. All of those things were already well understood, but they weren't well implemented widely until the pandemic rolls around and we have a real barrier to people being able to consume, in a way that they were comfortable with or familiar with. And so it became important for retailers, brands, products and services to figure out how to catch up in that moment. And this is a really kind of important point, I think, for any HR leader who's dealing with digital transformation. One of the points I make in What Matters Next is that we talk about digital transformation as if it's synonymous with innovation, and it's not. It is actually the act of catching up to what the externalities demand that you catch up to. Innovation is about looking ahead of those externalities. So once again, we find ourselves on the now next continuum where we can pull from the past into the present and then look from the present into the future. That act of pulling from the past is digital transformation. So this is where I think it's really clear by looking at that Levi Strauss example and saying, all of these things existed. Other brands had done it. Other retailers had done it. But what they did is say, in order to, really conform to what our customers need and are expecting, we need to really step it up and adapt and make this possible. Innovation will be something that's looking much farther ahead for them. But the point is, I think we see again and again, companies that really look at the present moment. And we saw a lot of this in the pandemic, to be fair, right? A lot of organizations had to figure out digital transformation in a hurry,
Yeah.
right? To
Yeah.
make sure that their services could be consumed or used or whatever. But I think that question is going to be a rolling one. It's going to be an evolving one where you sort of have to continuously look at how have market expectations changed? What are people looking for from you now that may be a little different from what they were looking for from you a few years ago? And how do you need to bring that up to speed? And that's inside the organization and outside the organization. So whether you're doing digital transformation from an employee experience standpoint or from a customer experience standpoint, all of it is looking at how are people expecting to be able to interact with us as an organization, and what can we do to make sure we're meeting that expectation. And then innovation is letting us look ahead and start to plan for what might matter next.
I love that. I've never actually heard or never even considered the differences between the two. And I think you've explained it perfectly. So that's a distinction I'm going to take away from today's show for sure. And obviously we've talked a little bit about elements of the book, What Matters Next. And I'll just remind people it's a leader's guide to making human-friendly tech decisions in a world that's moving too fast. So
just too fast.
I'm a big believer, just too, absolutely right. I'm a big believer in, actually, I think this relates to nutrition. I found this first quote when I read a book called Cured, and I think it was Socrates, but don't quote me, I might be incorrect. But the quote goes, you don't need to be ill to get better. And I think you can apply this to many other elements, including where we are right now in the world of tech. A lot of people are going, but I've got everything working fine. I've got my payrolls being processed accurately, on time, and compliantly. I've got an HR process that has a standard level of retention, attrition, onboarding, engagement. We're running okay at the moment. So why do we need to even think about innovation or transformation, depending whether we're now or in the future? Because at the moment it's working. But I would come back and say that's fine. You don't need to be ill to get better. That doesn't mean we can't start taking those steps to making better decisions for the future. So I really want to bring your book back into focus. Are there elements here that perhaps we haven't discussed so far that you just want to, discuss with our listeners, let them think about things slightly differently, maybe with that quote in mind, to say, hey, look, I know it's working okay. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be curious. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be thinking about the future now.
I love that quote. I'm going to have to look that up too, because that's a good one. But you don't have to be ill to get better. And what you can do is understand this. As I talked about, the relationship between business and the people outside the business. Let's focus just on people outside the business for now, as opposed to inside the business. I think it makes a little bit easier model to understand this premise. If we think about the purpose of an organization, and maybe we could take Netflix as an example, right? The purpose of Netflix is to provide entertainment or content for people to consume, or something along those lines. Could probably articulate it better. You would think that someone who was one of the first 100 employees would know how to articulate it better. But what they're trying to accomplish is one thing. What people outside the organization are trying to accomplish is a totally different thing, right? They're looking for a way to spend their evening that helps them escape, etc. Like, they've got a goal that's different from the goal that the company has. But somewhere in the middle, those goals meet. In an ideal situation, you have a lot of customers with whom your ideals overlap, with your goals overlap. You have alignment. And what I think is really important is to recognize that where we use technology to amplify and accelerate, what we're trying to accelerate is that alignment, not the company objective. So if we're just trying to accelerate the company objective, then we find ourselves in the trap of optimizing for profit and optimizing for growth. And those things are important, but not singularly important. They're important only in the context of how well we're doing relative to our customers. Because if we don't have our customers, we don't have anything. So it's always about looking at that relationship between what the company exists to do, what the people outside the company are trying to do, and the alignment between the two, and using technology to amplify that alignment. So having said that, if you have an organization where you feel like payroll's running fine, all of these things are fine, why do I need to introduce new systems? What I will tell you is that what you'll find is that over time, your customers are probably going to evolve away from you into needing more current use of technology. They're going to evolve to a place where they're seeing the market move to a more advanced set of technologies. and they go like, why haven't you done this? And so what you've done is allowed that alignment to slip. And what we want to do is keep you in alignment with what customer expectations are, keep you serving that alignment as well as possible. So it's about the fact that, like we said before, you're going to have to grow. You're going to have to continually be asking these questions and revisiting whether your strategy is up to speed. You don't need to adopt every new technology as it comes out just because it's the new technology, but you do need to continually ask, from the perspective of your strategy, not from the perspective of the technology, but from the perspective of your technology and the purpose that you are trying to accomplish as a business, do we have the right set of tools in place to serve that alignment with our customer?
I think it's a fantastic example. You know what? Something came to mind. You mentioned payroll as one of the many facets that often fall under the world of HR, remit or reward or whatever. But in that just particular example, what occurred to me is, yes, you might be paying people compliantly on time at the moment, but technology such as pay on demand, which is real-time pay, companies offering that now versus a company that isn't, you may end up then losing people to another business that does offer it. And of course, that then impacts other elements of HR. That element that impacts attrition, it impacts the ability to recruit new talent when you're not offering a modern solution that employees want. And I think one thing we have seen is that, particularly post-pandemic, is that massive shift towards the employee experience. Not just the experience, what we're trying to deliver as an internal micro function, but on a macro level, what do our employees want if you want to keep them? And that has to sometimes look beyond. I think you crystallized that really well with that example. I guess my last question I'd like to ask, and just for our listeners to finalize this part of question, we're going to open the HR L&D Vault in just a moment, which are 3 short, sharp questions for you. Before we get there, though, for those that want to build a human-centered culture within organizations, we know that HR and L&D professionals are really often responsible for being given the role for shaping cultures. All right? I know it obviously goes broader than just their remit, but they said, we want a culture that's adaptive, that's ethical, that's grounded in shared purpose. We've talked today about the importance and the impact that meaning can have. What would be your recommended steps? I know it's a big question, but if they want to leave this show right now and take their first step in trying to achieve that in what is going to be a very AI-dominated landscape, what would you suggest?
I think it really means being the champions of human potential while leveraging technological advancements, right? Like, we're going to need to leverage technological advancements, but someone has to be the one who's constantly reminding the organization, how can we maximize human potential here? And there's too much to lose if we don't. And so it does come back to, it's creating environments where people can grow, can find meaning in their work, as we discussed, and can innovate. They can be, as we talked about, the example of giving a sort of central purpose that people can interpret in their own ways and go out and solve problems on behalf of the organization and come back and bring them centrally to, the knowledge and insights from that. I always say, when I talk about marketing, that marketing works best when it is the knowledge center of an organization, and that everyone can feel free to dip into the store of the knowledge center of marketing. It's the same way here. If HR's role is as the guardians of human potential and the amplifiers of that potential, then every part of the organization should understand that that's how they fit into that part of the relationship, is that there's where the expertise of human potential and human development really comes to play and comes to the fore, but also that this is an opportunity to be an expert in how we leverage technology relative to making the most of human potential. And I think that's an incredible opportunity as we go forward, that there are so many ways that we're going to be able to champion the human while embracing the tech. And that's a great role for HR leaders in the future.
You may have just unknowingly eclipsed what's always previously been my favorite term for HR professionals. I've always thought of HR professionals as being cultural architects. And I've always loved that. I thought that really, for me, encompasses a lot of the responsibilities that senior HR professionals have on their shoulders to be able to. But I think you've just surpassed it with the guardians of human potential. I'm going to upgrade it now. That should be the new term. We should take that away.
They go together really well, though. Architects and
they
guardians.
Do. Yeah, guardians of human potential is just eclipsed and moved. Now, maybe that's the one rung up from cultural architects. So I'll thank you and credit that one to you for sure. But listen, we're going to open the HR L&D Vault. 3 really short, sharp questions for you. First one is this: one piece of advice you'd give to an HR leader trying to navigate the future of work.
Well, I think we just hit it a little bit there with,
Sure.
really kind of thinking about how tech is the amplifier of human potential. So stay focused on human potential. But I also think there's an opportunity here, especially as many organizations are streamlining and shedding their ethics and responsible tech functions, unfortunately, over the last few years. Where does that belong going forward? And I can't think of a better place for that kind of responsibility to live than in the HR, the human resources and human potential guardianship department. So certainly there's an opportunity for developing how you understand regulatory compliance, ethical AI development, all of the sort of policies and everything that go along with AI, really being a great spokesperson and advocate for ethical and responsible tech and AI use as it relates to the development of human potential.
Amazing. Second question: if you could improve the current world of work with one action or improvement, what would it be?
I would like for more leaders to read my book.
There's nothing wrong with that. That should also be the first step back to my last question that people can take, I think. Leave this
Yes.
show, go read the book. What matters next?
Because I would like for leaders to be making better decisions. I think we will make the world a much, much better place if there's what I break down in the book is that there are, we talk about the now next continuum and that timeline. If you make a decision ahead of what you understand about the consequences of its repercussions or the consequences of it, you're invoking the harms of action, I call it. And if you hesitate to make a decision when you have all the information you need and that you should be making that decision, you are invoking the harms of inaction. And what I see constantly is people making decisions that are invoking those harms in both directions. And, it's very easy to conjure examples of the harms of inaction, climate change, like period, full stop.
Sure.
We should have had a lot more action on climate change. And we're hesitating way too much in that space. But there are other examples too. The harms of action, though, are a lot about the tech acceleration that we're seeing and people racing way too fast, way too far ahead in the deployment of AI in ways that we don't really understand how this is going to shake out, a tech generation or two down the road. So those are things that I would love to see people being a lot more circumspect, not taking decisions slower necessarily, but being more deliberate and more thoughtful in the way they approach those decisions.
Perfect. Fantastic. And my last question is, what's something unexpected that you've learned from working with some of the world's top organizations? Netflix we've discussed today. I'd love to know if there's one thing that perhaps unexpected you could share.
I think maybe the one thing I already shared with you about watching leaders ask open-ended questions and just sit with the discomfort of not knowing in the service of learning. And perhaps that's a suitable thing to bring back here because you do have this focus on learning, and I think it's so important. I think it's so critically important that leaders take an approach that is open to recognizing what they still have to learn and bringing that learning about not only for themselves but for the organization, really championing an organization that's open to learning. When I see that in an organization, I feel very, very at ease. When I'm in a boardroom working with a C-suite or on site at a company doing a keynote or something like that, and I see leaders who are down to earth, talking to their teams, talking to me. If I'm at a keynote and the CEO makes a point of coming over to me and introducing him or herself, and it sets me at ease right away. I'm like, they're making good decisions here. Yeah. And I think that's a great lesson for all of us to take away.
Fantastic. Well, I think you've given us many lessons to take away today, Kate. So, Kate O'Neill, thank you ever so much for joining me today on the L&D podcast. I think hopefully you've given everybody that's listening a really timely reminder that technology itself doesn't shape the future of work. Leaders do. The creating meaningful work is what really shapes the future. And by aligning those tech choices with those human values, we can collectively as HR professionals build really ethical, adaptive and meaningful workplaces, which really do make a difference. Of course, for anyone interested in the book, there will be a link in the show notes. You can go straight through and get yourself a copy. It's on Amazon at the moment. It's called What Matters Next. It's an absolute must read, I think, for HR L&D professionals that are interested in this subject. If I go back to my last question before the vault, where I said, what's the first step people can take? I think really, from my perspective, go read the book and then take the step that Kate mentioned after. It's a really great lesson. I also recommend going to Kate's website. It's koinsights.com. There will be a link again in the show notes. There's some fantastic resources there. You can see Kate on stage giving some of her keynotes, which I have to say are absolutely energetic and fantastic and illuminating and full of insight. So check that out as well. And you can follow Kate on YouTube. There's her YouTube handle is Tech Humanist. And again, there'll be a link in the show notes. You want to share all of Kate's content. She's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today on the show, Kate.
Nick,
You've given us so much. You've given us so much.
Thank you. What a great discussion, and you led it so well. I appreciate it.
Well, I've really enjoyed it. And of course, if you've enjoyed the episode as well, please do remember to click subscribe, click follow, share this with your HR colleagues and friends, and anyone else you think may be able to take something away from today's episode. I'd really appreciate it. It's with your support we can really raise the profile of human resources for the future. So please do give us your support if you can. I look forward to bringing you the next episode of the HR L&D podcast real soon. Kate O'Neill, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Nick.
Global teams are more connected than ever, but managing payroll, HR, and IT can still feel fragmented. Deal simplifies global work with one platform that keeps everything running smoothly. No compliance guesswork, no third-party payroll, just seamless operations backed by 24/7 expert support. That's why over 35,000 companies trust Deal to handle their global workforce. Visit deal.com/nickday to see how Deal can help. That's DEEL.com/NICKDAY. Deal, your forever people platform.